Toyota's new RAV4 is a surprisingly different beast to before because it really has changed. And I don't just mean that there's now no longer a diesel option and you can only buy it as a hybrid in common with much of the rest of the current Toyota range. No, I mean the whole fundamental basis of the car seems to have taken quite a big shift in that Toyota kind of admits that the last version had become a bit too soft-edged, a bit too MPV-ish, a bit too tall estate car-ish, and it wanted to take advantage of the current desire and demand for proper rugged 4x4 SUVs and really drive home the RAV's SUV credentials. It starts with a big boot, much bigger than before, 80 litres bigger than before at 580 litres, and it gets much more divisive styling. I have to say, there is something of the argument that this is a face only a mother could love, but equally, while it's certainly colour and spec sensitive, I must admit that the RAV4 styling did grow on me during my time with it. It's certainly much more rugged looking than before, particularly in this side view. You can see very strong overtones of various Jeep models, and I mean Jeep with a capital J. Look at those big, hefty looking squared off wheel arches. This is a car that wears its rugged outdoorsy nature very much on its sleeve. So it feels and looks very, very different to the much softer edged previous generations of RAV4. It's moving away from that urban SUV crossover style to something much more sort of proper 4x4-ish. That's reflected too in the cabin, although it's not an obvious thing at first. It's much more simple, much less complex, much less luxurious looking layout than that of the smaller CHR, and cleaves much more closely to what you'd get in terms of style in the much bigger, more obviously rugged Land Cruiser model. The RAV is meant to be a bridge between those two models now, in fact. There's also some very clever tech in here. If you look at that rear view mirror, it's not actually a mirror at all. It's a screen taking a feed from a rear-facing camera. That's designed to give you rear visibility when the back is fully loaded up to the roof. Sadly, for the moment, it's an expensive option and one that we're not going to get in Ireland, but that may change in time. Hopefully it will. It's a neat little bit of technology, and we really enjoy using it. It's certainly very useful if you regularly carry big loads or tall passengers in the back of your car. Now, out on the road, the RAV drives, well, the way it drives depends on which model you've gone for. While there is only one engine, a 2.5 litre 4-cylinder Atkinson cycle petrol with the hybrid backup and the CVT automatic gearbox, there are technically two versions. There's a front-wheel drive version and an all-wheel drive version, which gets an extra electric motor mounted directly onto the back axle, giving it four-wheel drive without the need for a hefty prop shaft and transfer gearbox. Now, the two cars are very different to drive. The front-wheel drive version feels much happier loafing around town or doing very simple, straightforward runs up and down motorways or main roads. When you put it onto a twisty, turny mountain road such as this one, it just starts to feel a bit all at sea. It loses its neatness of handling. While the steering is always very pleasantly weighted and there's a bit of feel and feedback, not much but a bit, there's a lack of balance and it just starts to understeer too quickly and it starts to wallow and squeal the tyres a bit, and it's just not a lot of fun. By contrast, if you go for the all-wheel drive version, for a start, the extra power that comes from the rear electric motor really helps the performance. There's not a huge difference in overall power. In fact, the official figure is only 4 horsepower in the difference. But it means you spend less time letting the engine run up to high RPM to build speed, as you tend to with a CVT gearbox. So it's much more refined, feels much punchier. And the fact that you can transfer power to the rear wheels really seems to help with the handling and the precision of the car. It just feels much happier being chucked about. Although, it must be said, this is always a car that's much more tuned for comfort. There's quite a bit of body roll, and it's not really something for chucking into a corner in the way that you would the smaller CHR crossover, which is actually quite a good fun car to drive. And that's even though the two cars share the same basic TNGA platform underneath. What was really surprising about this RAV4 though, and very much in keeping with that desire to make it seem and feel and be a proper rugged SUV, is the fact that when you get it off-road like this, it's really rather good. Now, these pictures actually don't do it justice, because while a lot of the route we were on, as you can see here, was just fairly simple dusty, gravelly roads, which you could get along quite happily in any ordinary hatchback or even small city car. There were sections where it had been raining that were properly muddy and slippery and steep, where the rocks were much bigger and chunkier, and where the car really had to deploy that all-wheel drive, where it really had to use that extra 11mm of ride height that it has compared to the old version. And it turns out to be a surprisingly rugged, capable off-roader. I mean, I wouldn't go chasing a Land Rover Defender up a country lane with it, but nevertheless, for what almost anybody will ask of it, it is very, very good indeed. It's really useful. It will get you off into the boonies and bring you back again, and then be a comfortable, efficient, smooth and low emissions hybrid when you're driving around town and on the main roads. So whatever you think of the styling and whether you think Toyota are right to go in the direction they are, this new RAV is pretty impressive, I have to say.